Thanks for the intro. So I'm Jerry Belich, and as George alluded to, I'm a game designer. I work with alternative games quite a bit, so a lot of hybrid of physical and digital experiences. This will be a slightly different talk than I think I usually put on. I usually will either deconstruct my work or talk about the work in some way or talk about the methods I use in the work. And this isn't any of that. This is a bit more ranty and call to action. So let's take a trip in my head, which is very much like a circus. Which brings us to games, the greatest show on earth. So George makes a good point when making everything a question, because I think that it is a big question. What are games in terms of a medium, and how are they going to change and grow as we change and grow as game designers and the people that consist of the industry. So I'm Jerry. Game designer, storyteller. I love doing not just physical work, but I also love telling stories and finding ways to really connect people. And I think circuses are really, really interesting because they're kind of this fantastical, crazy spectacle that, frankly, a lot of the game industry has sort of become. They're undeniably fun, but also kind of rampant with weird abuses of people and their talents and what goes on. A circus is just a strange place where kind of anything can potentially happen. It's also interesting looking at something that is primarily flash over substance. And what do you do with people that you're trying to entertain or engage when the adrenaline wears off? And I also kind of want to talk about community, the people that love games, that love being entertained, that love interacting, but then also what their role is in being a part of that. And what sides are we on? From the creators to the people that play. Are we in this together, or is this have we kind of found this big struggle in this young medium? Before I get into that, I wanted to tell a story about the first time I went to the circus. And it was in middle school, and I'd found out that the students that were volunteering to be bus cops, did anybody know what bus cops are? Was anybody ever a bus cop? Maybe this is just where I was from. So basically being a bus cop is you wear a very bright orange sash with a very fake-looking badge, and you are basically just putting a target on yourself while on the bus as someone willing to tattle on other people. At least that was kind of the feeling you get from your peers. But I found out that they all get to go on a free trip to the circus. So I immediately joined the bus cops so that I could go the weekend after. So I'm just very, very concerned about student safety, and not just. You could say that I gamed the system in that way. It's so bad. So I went to the circus for the first time, and it was incredible. It was absolute pandemonium. Just a weird, wonderful place consisting of just act after act after act of things that had no relation to each other. The commonality was these bizarre talents, these whether they be feats of strength or things that you didn't even know people were capable of, and people hurting themselves. Just kind of a common element, I think, in a lot of entertainment. It's, for some reason, really entertaining to see people hurt themselves and fall off things. And then, weirdly, it's also fun to see them succeed and not do those things. So after the circus, I was kind of blown away. It's an experience that never lets you process. It's kind of trying to keep you from thinking about what's happening until you get to the end, until this multi-hour extravaganza of adrenaline and insanity finally closes, and you actually think about what you saw and just how bizarre it all really is. Now, the circus, as we know it, came to be because of Philip Astley. And this was back in 1768. Now, he was an expert rider. He was an equestrian and decided he wanted to open up a riding school. And so he opened this riding school and had riding lessons in the morning, and then in the afternoon would do these feats of horsemanship and would show off his incredible abilities. Well, after a while, he realized, like, basically nobody cared about the riding lessons anymore. They just wanted to see these amazing things that he could do. And so the space that he had, this circular field, and they called this a circus, became the center ring for what became circuses today. And so more and more, over a period of about 2 years, it was everybody coming to see this horseback riding, these amazing tricks that he would do. And as that happened, he had to find other acts to fill in the space between the horse shows. And so by 1770, it was now this circus. It was now this wild show with jugglers and all these different kinds of people, rope dancers, and these crazy, crazy things just happening in between the acts. And that went into the idea of just constantly hitting the audience with all the stimuli, getting the adrenaline pumping, keeping their attention raptured for the entire duration, and trying to keep from losing the audience's attention in those lulls between what became kind of the main acts. But the frustrating thing is how adaptable we are as humans. We get used to things so quickly. Like, you can blow our minds one day with an elephant that can do these tricks, and by the next day it's pretty cool. It's still a neat elephant. By the end of the week, you don't care about one elephant. Like, I want 5 elephants. If it's not 5 elephants, I'm not entertained. I need more elephants. And this is how it continues to go. 5 elephants is no longer enough, and now we need 10 elephants, and they need to be stacked on top of each other for me to be impressed. So thus goes this crazy arms race of entertainment, of that high adrenaline junkie kind of entertainment. But then even eventually that wasn't enough, and this started forming into the inclusion of what they called circus freaks, and taking these people that were very different and using them as this distractions from everything else, and showing them off and putting the spotlight on them, which is it's kind of sad. This exploitative thing, more and more moving away from kind of the talent to something like that, and I think in some ways our communities suffer from that as well, especially as we grow as this new artistic form of expression. And like, we accept the freaks, we accept these different things as long as we aren't challenged by them. So why were circuses so successful? Like, 'cause I think some of that's obvious. Like, it's very entertaining. It's just an assault to the senses, which is very exciting. But a big advantage they had over other forms of entertainment was the fact that it was primarily a visual performance art. There were no language barriers. This is something that any education level, anyone could get to. It was very, very accessible. And knowing that, realizing just how easy it was for any and all types of people to enjoy this, especially in the late 1700s, it led to innovations like using the railroad as a conduit to get to all of these people. Because they knew no matter what town they went to, whatever the town's purpose, if it was for coal mining or built around some other resource, And a lot of these people may not be highly educated. They've been trained to like do this very particular kind of work. This was still something that anyone could go to, anyone could enjoy, and there was a lot of value in that. It turned into a huge market simply because of that. And having that like direct conduit to everybody is a very powerful thing, and that's why we see like if you look at the distribution of games today, the power of being Valve and having Steam, this direct line to everybody, and having that kind of control, or the App Store. Like you see how these different companies are trying to hold on to these different methods of distribution, especially Apple. I feel like keeps kind of a stranglehold on it because they know how much this is worth. They know how powerful it is to get straight to the people in a very accessible way. So this went all over the world very quickly. So this is a print from Japan of circuses that people could go to. So it just expanded and went all over the place with animals and all the acts and everything. But there's another piece that I think, interestingly enough, we all identify with circuses, kind of this symbol of the circus, the character that became that face of the circus. And that, of course, is the clown. The clown, the wonderful, scary, creepy clown. It's very interesting, like how the clown has changed over a few hundred years from what it originally was, the fool. And Philip Astley brought the clowns into his circus very early on as one of those initial acts. But it's unique because he actually got the clowns from Elizabethan theater. Now, this is really important because, like, first, clowns have been around for hundreds of years prior to that. A main element in like Shakespearean plays, the character of the fool, this ridiculous individual that keeps screwing things up. And they were translated to the spectacle of the circus. They didn't need to talk. They were able to kind of tell their stories, simply through their actions. And right there, I think, is a really important part of that, because it is that element of story that was unique, I think, to all of the other acts of the circus. They had something that could keep people engaged despite the lulls, something that didn't require the high energy, that didn't require the like constant assault. And that's what the clown was able to do for them, is become a very accessible way to tell these simple stories. And that became, like, I think that's a really important point. I think that's something that we're seeing a lot more in games now, even in the last 5 years, that people are realizing again just the power of story and the power of narrative. Because despite how fast your GPU is and how many pixels you can push, there's only so long you can push that at people before like that becomes the norm and the new mundane and easy to just pass beyond. And part of that thing with clowns is they were able to tell stories just using their bodies. They didn't need words to do it. They didn't need narrators to do it. They were able to create these scenarios and develop characters purely through their actions. And they also became kind of a template for the modern cartoon logic, the idea of these ridiculous characters that are not influenced by physics or the reality around them until they're confronted with it. So I think I had a lot of fun Googling clown images. And I really don't want to give clowns a bad rap, because modern clowning is actually a fascinating area of theater. But this is really good. And so I think with that, a thing we can take from that is some of the most powerful stories that can be told are the stories that are never told, right? If we go back to that idea of accessibility, the idea of telling stories that don't run into language barriers, that don't run into other barriers of education or backgrounds or where people come from. And that's just one way to do it, but it was a way that was very compatible with the circus show, and so it worked very well. Now, games are kind of this ultimate grab bag of expression. I think we have a hard time nailing down what they are and what they consist of, because they can really consist of any other medium or none of them. They don't conform to the same rules as books or sculpture or paintings, where you have this very, very pretty strict definition of like, well, this is, you paint on a thing and then you've got a painting. You carve a thing and look, I've got a sculpture, and I write a bunch of words down in a sequence, and I've got, a short story or a book or a novel. But games don't fall into that. They are this ethereal thing that you can take from any of those. They can be like all about the visuals, the sights. They can be all about the sounds. They can be all about the words. If you take like Choose Your Own Adventure books, like they were a book, but they were also a game, because you were given a choice. You were given the ability to interact with this medium. And like that, a circus has no defined structure. You can rearrange all the acts. You could add new ones and delete other ones, and nobody is going to notice. Nobody is going to say like, oh, this doesn't make sense anymore. It's not like a play where you rearrange scenes and it makes just as much sense. It could be an amalgamation of just about anything, as long as it captured the audience's attention. Now, we play games all the time, with ourselves, with other people, sometimes without them knowing it. How many times have you been walking through a tiled room and just on a whim you decide you're not going to step on any of the cracks? And you put effort into this. You make that this goal, and so you walk across this room and you don't touch any cracks, because that's how you win. And it's weird. You don't really think about it much. You don't stop and think, all right, what should the rules be of me crossing this floor? You just do it. And you do it because it's an interesting distraction, and there's a challenge involved. So games are very much, I think, a part of us. They're a part of who we are. And I think like every child, probably in a single summer, has invented more games than a game designer has in their entire career. They every day coming up with new, weird, bizarre rules, and they may not make a whole lot of sense, and the quality will probably vary. But it's something that's part of us. It's kind of innate. So another game, and this is one that a lot of children have played and kind of invented independently of each other, is repeating, everything that you say. So it's a great example of having a multiplayer game where there's only one willing participant. And being somebody that is never kind of properly grown up, like my wife can attest that I play games like this with her all the time, and it's not her favorite thing about me. You can also make games out of work. You can make games out of the different tasks that you do, and I think this is another thing that we naturally do. I like to make a game out of, when I'm putting talks together, Google image searching the keywords and whatever notes I'm writing and using that picture. So this is a good example of that. This is the first image that came up when I looked up the word mundane. I don't know why it's Scrabble tiles. I don't know what that means, but it looks kind of cool. So I guess I win. Now, when we talk about games, especially in the context of an event like this, and especially as a young medium, what we're primarily talking about are video games or digitally enhanced games. And so these are something that haven't been around very long. Like, games themselves have been around for many, many thousands of years. We found games that the Egyptians have made. But this is different. And it's different because it's the first time that both technology has allowed the creation of a lot of new kinds of games, but also that technology has allowed us to reach so many people and have it become a medium that's able to permeate so much of our culture. And it's a really powerful time right now to help form the future of this medium of mediums, this art form, and for us to decide as a community what's important for that to grow. Another big piece of that is the mass commercialization of games. And this, like anything else, can be kind of a double-edged sword. On the one hand, it's getting people to create a lot of incredible work, and work that probably could not be done unless money was involved, unless funding was involved, unless there was a possibility to recoup so that you can continue to create. And so games as a business is very important. And I don't believe that games as art and games as business are a separate thing. I think it's important to understand both sides of that and to allow them to commingle. Of course, having a product that doesn't require a physical form also is a huge boon. Having to ship stuff all over the world is automatically this incredible limitation. But now that we have something that doesn't need that, like if you've got a painting, sure, you can take a picture of that painting and put it on the internet, but people still like to be there. People still want to go to the Louvre and see the Mona Lisa in person, because that is the thing. That's where it exists. But games don't necessarily suffer from that same problem, at least in the digital sense. Everybody can have the original. Everybody can have the experience that the creator or the artist intended. And so a big reason that we go to events like this is to figure out what our place is in that industry and the community that surrounds it. So are games the greatest show on earth? Like, is this purely hyperbole? Or do we exist at a very pivotal and important place in the history of games? They probably, it was 1970s when games first started becoming a thing that was really available, that the industry kind of existed in a sense that was recognizable. That's barely, over 40 years. This is nothing. So I look at now, especially with just the fervor and all this intensity that's happened in the game industry over the last 5-10 years, and there's something happening. There's something really big happening. And I think a lot of us know that, but I don't think a lot of us realize how important our role is within that and how that's going to form. Now, games are also different from mediums in another way. It's not just that they borrow from all these different forms, but they have this ingredient of being interactive. And I think it's easy to pass over that idea very quickly. Like, what does it mean to have interactivity? You don't just observe it. You don't sit and just ponder what the intentions of the artist were, or just watch it like a film, or sit and just read through it in this purely linear fashion. I mean, even there, maybe you get the choice of the pace you read, but for me, the only change that's ever made is I take too long between chapters and I kind of forget what's going on. It's this wonderful thing that we get this automatic engagement because we are actually given some of the power, some of the control. We're no longer separate, looking at from the other side of the glass, but we're truly part of the experience. And you don't just show people your games, you invite them into your games. But giving up control is scary. It's really hard. As an author, it's nice to control everything about an experience. I mean, Ebert at one point had said that games couldn't be art simply because you were giving up authorial control. He recanted on that because it was a pretty bold and I think very wrong statement, but I think it also showed even the most brilliant minds were still trying to process what games were and just what kind of power they have. Like this isn't very long ago that that a statement like that was made, and it's kind of wild. And the spectrum of control is so wide. You could make a twine game, so a text game, where the only control is being able to click on different links that show you different parts of the narrative, but don't even change the course of the narrative. So maybe the only choice that you're allowed to make as the consumer, as the player, is how much of it you want to see. So is that a game? Is that not a game? Is that definition important, or is it simply just part of this incredible spectrum of bringing people in and letting them be a part of it, but exercising different amounts of control as the creator? So, as with circuses, there's initially a very low barrier to entry. You welcome players inside the tent and you try to keep them busy, surprised, entertained, but the turnstile goes all the way around. And that first free token, that first free hit where people are totally willing to come and enter your experience, that can wear off very quickly. And you have to decide how are you going to keep them there? How are you going to keep them engaged? And I think that brings us back to the power of things like story and storytelling and narrative that are able to hold people's attention and not just keep them engaged through surprise, but keep them engaged by connecting them to the elements of the world, whether it be the characters or the setting. Because players are the most dangerous game. They are these animals that without any kind of taming will run amok in whatever scenario or world that you present them. And it's not their fault, it's in their nature, right? We all understand this. I can't help entering a new game to just poke around immediately trying to figure out what the game designers did or didn't think of. And it's kind of this cruel, gleeful act that I just can't help but enjoy. I also try to approach it well, how does the designer want me to play this? What are their expectations? But it's difficult to rein people in. As anyone that's ever worked on any kind of MMO can probably attest, developing and enforcing social contracts of behavior can be nearly impossible. But it's been done. Dealing with people who purely get enjoyment out of trying to destroy the experience for others, while others are actually just trying to tell their own stories. So, some designs embrace this. And I don't know if anybody here has ever visited the wonderful land of Second Life. I did. A friend of mine and I, we sat down one day and were let's go in. Let's go see what this is. But we wanted a buddy. We had heard stories. We knew this was kind of an upsetting place if you got into the wrong neighborhood. So we did. We went in together and we're all right, well, what do we do first? It's well, Transformers just came out. We should probably go find Transformer avatars and then go to the beach. Because there are no limits in a world like Second Life. It is the ultimate sandbox that allows anyone to do anything that they want. So, as the clowns taught us, giving people something to latch on to, any amount of story, is a great way to entice them when the spectacle dies down. And sometimes the way to do that is not necessarily designing that for the players, but giving them the tools to design it for themselves. And that's something else that just, as much as there's incredibly disturbing and upsetting content on Second Life, there's also an incredible amount of detailed creation there that tells a really vibrant story, many kinds of vibrant stories. And I think people see that in a lot of different kind of sandbox style work. Because story, just kind of the interactive element of games is another layer that can be applied to to any of these different forms, no matter what combination that you decide to use for your work. It's versatile. It's truly kind of a limitless ingredient. Now, like, as anyone that's ever activated God mode in their games, I think we all kind of realize that the instant gratification of power is something that doesn't really extend gameplay much, right? Like, it's if anything, quickly dilutes it, and you just run out of steam. Being able to have everything you want without any kind of challenge, without any kind of development, without the chance to develop your own story, is a really quick way to fall out of that experience. And so that's part of what we talk about when it's not just the stories that are designed by the creators themselves, but giving players a structure, giving them constraints that allow them to run into challenges, run into problems, and see how they're going to solve it, which gives them a story that they can tell. Without explicit narrative, as long as those tools exist, they will create. So when Minecraft first became a thing, two friends of mine and I set up a server so that we could, like, after work and in our downtime, go into this communal world and start messing around. We all know Minecraft is this kind of incredible sandbox. And so my friend Thad, he spent lots of time building this just incredible castle. And Brian and I, because we were playing at very different times, and that was kind of a fascinating part of it, is even though we didn't always play at the same time, it still felt very much like we were. We could see the evidence of what each other was doing, and the subtle changes that would occur as we all put time into it. So while Thad was building this castle, Brian and I went off underground and were creating this complex, and finally emerged with these giant mole statues, all staring over Thad's castles. And we put so much effort into this, and I don't necessarily know why. There was a certain point when we were digging around and we just decided we're mole people. This is our identity. This is who we are. This is our culture. And so we had to create that history. We had to become the mole people and decide what our traditions were. What are our holidays? Like, when do we work and when do we take work off? I don't know. And now Thad didn't necessarily know what was happening during this, but he could definitely see that something was going on, especially the first time a 18-story mole was creeping out of the ground and staring at his castle menacingly. So, now at the time we didn't have the benefit of new skins to become mole people, but I think in our hearts we knew who we were, and he definitely knew. So there's kind of another interesting side effect, I think, in the audience of games, because they're no longer just observers. And I think it's been true for a lot of mediums, especially if you look more recently, comic books and movies. People get very attached to the stories they love, to the characters they love, to all these different fandoms. And but this change, this ability to actually influence the form, simply as a player, I feel has given people a greater ownership, or a feeling of ownership or entitlement over the things they play. So even though there's this great love for things, even Harry Potter, the fandoms that have developed around this stuff is just huge and wide, and fandom I think can be a very, very good thing. But the lengths that people and players are willing to go to in order to defend or rise up against things that they had no part in creating in the first place is kind of terrifying. Like, we've seen a lot of damage done over the last handful of years, and damage that's been done for much longer than that, but not necessarily heard about. But there's also something, there's a lot of potential there. And maybe the misnomer is saying that people that play games don't have any ownership. Maybe the fact that they are taking part in those universes, that they are changing outcomes, means that they do have an implicit ownership, and that's the thing that we're coming up against as creators and players. And I don't know the answer to that. I don't know whether that's right or if that makes sense at all. But there's something really powerful there that I don't think we can deny. Because when you see so many people fighting for games, like as righteous or misguided as it may be, there's a lot of potential. There's something really big that I think we can both learn from and use for hopefully the better. There's a power that I think can be harnessed to better teach, to learn, to become a society where we can both maintain kind of the unique cultures, the unique viewpoints, the unique identities of all the people on this planet and their stories. And in that same way, making the planet even a smaller place than it is now. There's a lot of power to express and emphasize the different struggles, both bad and hard, but also like amazing things. So when I see like all of these people fighting so hard, but hurting each other, it's like something has to change. We are the community. We are like the people that have the opportunity now. Like as people get out of school, as people join the industry, there's a place to help with that, to help push that in a better direction, because there is room for everyone. Despite the fact that the first people involved in the making of digital games or modern games or the industry of games, despite what they have already created before us, that there is no set structure, there is no normal. And with increasing accessibility, with the better tools that we get, with more educational institutions that are supporting this, both technically and artistically, there's room for everybody, whether they just want to be a spectator or a performer. But, of course, one of the problems we find now is there's no promise of being accepted in that. And we all know that change is inevitable, but change is also really, really hard. And I think a lot of people have a lot of trouble accepting that. Growing into a more sophisticated, healthy medium takes a lot of time, and of course we all have different ideas of what that is. But I think we can speed that up in positive ways if we try, if we make a conscious effort to do so, if we ask questions but we don't immediately reject. The game industry as a whole is this big top. It's bizarre. It's full of so much crazy stuff, and we've become so numb to a lot of it. It's become so normal to see the kind of strange content and whether it's a barrage of shooters or strange games that are supposedly about ethics, like with BioShock. People are trying to figure out how to talk about these different things and how to engage users in different ways that make sense, that create empathy and make us believe that there's more there than maybe there really was. So this is Phantom Freak from the movie Hackers. Problem with Google imaging a lot of stuff is the word freak brings up a lot of uncomfortable things. So I went with Hackers Phantom Freak. So when I think about what our community is, if we think about the independent game community, and that can mean a lot of different things, but I think the important part there is a flood of new voices. of new ideas, of new kinds of people, this explosion of variety. These are the freaks. Like, we are the freaks. We are the new, we are the, like, crazy, the weird, the wonderful, even if it's not what, like, everybody wants and everybody expects, because they don't have to. Not everybody needs to be okay with all of it or understand all of it. And to an extent, people like the novel and the new. So, like, there's that initial, like, excitement over the different voices and the different people that come into play. But then once again, as soon as they become a challenge, as soon as they raise their voice, it becomes very easy to then turn around and try to silence those voices. Because, like, nobody wanted the freaks at the circus to talk or tell their stories. They just wanted to look. They wanted to point and they wanted to jeer. And the thing that they didn't understand at that time, and I think we have trouble understanding too, is that they were never the freaks. They were just different, and they had their own stories, and they had a lot of things that nobody ever got to discover as a result. Now, it's easy for me to talk because I blend in completely to all expectations. I'm very white, I'm very male, as you can tell under the glare of the light. And so it's easy for me to express anything I want, and probably the worst that'll ever happen is, like, my work will be criticized, but I will probably always be very, very safe. But what I can do is think about what it means to be a part of this community and to feel what it's like to be someone whose voice is immediately, like, attempted to be silent. And that makes me really sad, because there's so much cool, bizarre stuff, like, so much potential in, like, everybody in this room and all over the place. And like, those it's a hippo. So, like, when you have all these new people, the spectators, like, they don't necessarily always believe that they're worthy to entertain them, and they want, like I said, they want to see those freaks, but they don't want to hear the voice. As we grow up, just in our culture, in our society, playing games and being a part of the games community, we're told what makes us valuable. We're told what about us makes us worthwhile. So as we start, like, figuring out how to express ourselves creatively, it's becomes very easy to doubt anything that pushes against what you've been told your whole life about who you should be, what your identity is. And if that's all you're ever taught, like, why would you do anything different? So the freaks of our time, like, have a narrow tightrope to walk, partial products of prejudice, balancing between expressing themselves without becoming the subject of those jeers and derision. So why is it so hard for us to, like, accept the differences and not make them excuses to divide us? And I get really tired of waiting for progress. Like, we see that in so many areas of society, and not just games. The frustration with who's allowed to go into what bathroom, like, and you want to just throw up your hands because it just doesn't, like, it doesn't matter. Those things don't matter, and I don't know what to say to those people. I don't know what to say to that. I don't know how to express that it's so easy if we could just let go, if we could cycle a little faster and see what happens if things played out for just a little while and maybe things aren't so scary or dangerous. So if someone makes a game about depression or gender identity, and those are the elephant man and the bearded lady, then, like, the answer goes beyond just not ignoring them or just accepting that they exist, but for a lot of us to try and take that a step further and to celebrate that. To just stop pointing and jeering isn't quite enough. To ignore and pretend that the differences don't exist, like, isn't enough. It's not enough to just tolerate, but to realize just how grateful we should be at this incredible variety that we have as a culture, as an industry. And change is hard, but we have to remember that we're not losing anything. Nothing's going away. Nothing is being lost. And unlike the big top, there's all the room in the world. Every bizarre, weird, beautiful thing can exist, and you're never going to lose the thing that you loved or the thing that brought you here. So you may have heard this phrase, like, the king is dead, long live the king. So what does that mean? Like, why do people say that? Well, what I love about this is what it's communicating is an instantaneous transition. When one king dies, another king, the new king, is at that exact moment ascended to the throne. So when they say that phrase, the cool thing about that is right in the middle of that phrase is the indication of that transition. Who the king is changes right between those two sentences. And so, like, my hope, instead of generation-long reigns of the false label of normal, we can kill the reigning norms with increasing frequency and accept change with a constant declaration of the freaks are dead, long live the freaks. And that's all.